Hey guys, welcome back to the Pulling Curls podcast. We are talking about traveling with anxious or inflexible kids or adults. Let's untangle it. Hi, I'm Hillary Erickson, the curly head behind the Pulling Curls podcast, Pregnancy and Parenting Untangled. There's no right answer for every family, but on this show, we hope to give you some ideas to make life simpler at your house. Life's tangled, just like my hair. Okay, guys, today's guest is the owner of travelingdifferent.com. She has worked in the travel industry all throughout her life and has written for many major travel article magazines. I want to introduce today's guest, Dawn Barclay. Are you overwhelmed by all there is to do around your house? As a new mom, I felt overwhelmed at every turn. Fortunately, I turned to systems to make a change. Whether it's mornings, dinner time, or even just to climb out of a pile of kids' clothes, My Course family routines can save you. I hold your hand as we smooth out these rough patches, making every day easier so we can more easily handle when your preschooler tells you they can use their urine like a lightsaber. Parenting is always going to be a wild ride. Routines are just your seatbelt, and they can support you. Use coupon code UNTANGLED to save 15% at checkout. Link in the show notes. Hey, Dawn, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm going to pull my curls now.
Dawn, your hair looks pretty straight.
We can dream, can't we?
Okay, I think this is such a great topic because while your kid might be diagnosed with like autism, ADHD, all those types of things, you know, a lot of kids just are anxious when they travel, right?
Every child becomes anxious and inflexible when they travel because you're pulling them out of their comfort zone. Children love routine and they love predictability, and travel is anything but.
Yeah. I mean, some kids love travel, I think.
I think if they're prepared for it, and I think everything's a little scary. And It never hurts to prepare them correctly, because what's the harm?
Yeah. I would guess those kids have traveled since they were born.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
That was me.
Yeah. And these tips are probably great for me too, because my readers know I have a huge fear of flying. I had an uncle who died in a plane crash when I was in college. And ever since then, not a great flyer, getting so much better. I have a podcast episode on what I've done to get better at it. But what are your tips though for kids that are anxious or inflexible also? Like, so by inflexible, what do you mean by inflexible? Like what kind of things would show they were inflexible?
Not doing well with transitions. So The best example I can give you is one of my children, who remain unnamed, when we used to have to, like, we were just doing chores and I might be coming back from the supermarket and I said, I think I'd like to stop at the dry cleaner. And you would not believe the tantrum.
Okay.
It could not deal with transitions at all.
Okay.
So that's what I would call inflexible.
Okay. So we know anxious, and that's what inflexible is. So give us some tips on what we can do with our kids.
Oh, wow. There's so many. I mean, number one tip, buy my book. But of course, I'm going to say
What's the name of the book?
It's called Traveling Different, Vacation Strategies for Parents of the Anxious, the Inflexible, and the Neurodiverse. So this is 344 pages of about 85% strategies on how to avoid sensory meltdowns and that are interpreted as tantrums when you're traveling, and how to get the child excited about traveling and not so anxious. So number one tip, introduce the child to the concept of travel way before you're going to travel. You don't just sort of spring on, guess what, tomorrow we're going to Disney, or wherever you choose to go. Ways that you can make the familiar or the unfamiliar familiar include showing your child videos of every aspect of the trip. So when you get to the hotel, they know what the outside of the hotel looks like. Check-in, which can be pretty chaotic, looks like. The room. They have familiarity with what is going to be there. The videos can also be supplied by travel, so the actual travel vendor themselves. So you might go to the hotel site or the theme park site, so you can preview, say, rides at a theme park to see what you want to rule out in advance.
Yeah.
Introducing a young child to the concept of travel might include going and finding picture books that have their favorite characters in different travel situations, so that they can have a familiarity and comfort level with that. And your local librarian can recommend lots. I've got some in the book, but they're your best resource. Also, role play. Also, you might have what I consider mini experiences, which are perfect for people who are nervous about flying as well as children who have not flown before. There's a program by the ARC, called Wings for Autism, which closed down during COVID. They're starting up again. And this lets you do a dress rehearsal of the entire airport experience from arrival up into boarding. And so when it's not so supercharged because you're getting on the flight, here is more relaxed and you can actually see what it's going to be like to get through security. If you have a child on the spectrum, you can also take advantage of a group called TSA Cares, which is offered in many airports, where you actually have somebody assigned to you that can sort of shadow you and make sure that you get through security okay in some of the more difficult parts of the airport experience. So aside from airports.
Yeah, back to airports though. I remember as a kid, Mr. Rogers went on a plane, because we didn't have YouTube back in the day, but he went on a plane and they talked about like the food you would eat and how you would need to stay in your seat and how that was so important for safety. So there might be a YouTube of it out there because we all know Mr. Rogers explains everything the very best, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a great suggestion. And this is all things that you should think about ahead of time. How are you going to handle if you're stuck on the tarmac for 5 hours because of a delay, which is happening more and more now? So one way is to have first of all, you're always going to go everywhere with your go-to bag. So that's got your noise canceling headphones. It could have an eye mask. It could have electronics loaded with your favorite TV show, your child's favorite TV shows and movies, fidget toys, anything they like playing with. But it also can have little surprises that are wrapped, little gifts. Don't have to cost very much, can be like silly putty or something that's not going to crumble and not make a lot of noise. And you know what? Those are the things that you could say, if there's a delay, every hour that there's a delay, I'm going to give you one of these special little gifts.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to necessarily go for the plane. It could be any time during the trip if you've got a long wait at a restaurant.
Yeah, we 100% did that in the car because when my kids were tiny, we drove long distances frequently and we would have 100-mile gifts. So every time the odometer would hit 100 miles, we would have a gift.
I got a funny story that my parents used to also do that on long car rides. Every time we hit 100, we would say, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray. So when I met my husband and we were driving and we hit 100 miles and I went, hip, hip, hooray, he said, boy, your parents didn't have much confidence in their cars, did they?
It was the other drivers that they didn't have confidence in. I wanted to circle back to the surprise trips thing because I think that's like so cool now. But I remember I was like in 5th grade and my parents surprised us with a trip to Disney World. So I wasn't tiny, but I also wasn't old. And I just burst into tears. I was so scared about being on the plane and what the plane was going to be like. I think the surprise trip is fun, I think, in our minds, but a lot of times it's super overwhelming for kids. And I think we need to take that. Maybe if your kid's a great traveler, you're great with the surprise. But if they haven't gone before, maybe you need to like introduce it.
You absolutely do. And you have to really think through every part of that vacation as well, in terms of what your child can handle. So if your child doesn't do well with crowds, you probably don't want to take a bus between the airport and your arrival city and your hotel. Sure, it might be included and it might be free, but you know what? You might want to rent a car or hire an Uber or whatever you do because there's just less of a trigger there if you don't have to deal with the crowds. Yeah. And it's just thinking about that all the way along because 91% of children on the spectrum have sensory sensibilities, but they predict that maybe 1 out of every 6 children do. So be aware that children might react to crowds, loud noises, unfamiliar smells like cologne, things like that, and be willing to remove them from the situation if you can.
Yeah. So what do you do when they have that meltdown that, Disney is a great example because it's unpredictable and you may get stuck in a situation you prefer not to be in.
Yeah, that's why so much of the book is set up to avoid those situations by thinking ahead. I will tell you a story of somebody I interviewed with a special needs child who found out the hard way that Disney doesn't serve ice cream before 10 a.m. So his child arrives at 9 a.m. at Disney and starts screaming because there's no ice cream. And what he ended up doing was calling his certified autism travel professional, which is a group of people who are specially trained to help you with planning these trips. And she guided him to a quieter part of the park where the child could decompress until it was 10 and he could get his ice cream. but more and more locations, hotels, theme parks, museums, what have you, are becoming certified as autism certified centers or autism friendly. And what that entails is a lot of signage. So you might go to SeaWorld and you'll see a sign that says, this is what it's going to smell like after this point. So you can make an educated decision if you want to feed the seals or if you want to avoid that because your child does not want to smell that smell. But also where the lower sensory areas in the park will be. So they have sensory maps. And there are also cards that will identify you. An IAC is put out by a group called IBCCES. I know that's a lot of initials, but this group puts out the IAC card that will identify you as a special needs parent that might need special accommodations when you go to participating parks and venues.
Yeah. Also, I think as the parent, if you know your kid wants ice cream and you've just paid $500 for them to go have ice cream at a park, you have to be okay in your brain with like, part of the reason that we're going to be here is to give them new experiences, right? So how do you think the mom who's spending all this money deals with their own emotions during something like that?
I really try to avoid all that by having it be a child-centric vacation. So what I mean by that is that you're going to have your child weigh in on the choices of where you're going. So you're going to maybe look at 3 vacation places that have been vetted, hopefully by your travel professional and also by you is acceptable. And then say to the child, where do you want to go? And there can't be any wrong answers. And also do that for every day. What do you think you're going to want to do during the trip? And it might not be what you think they're going to want to do or what you want to do. But you know what? The whole point is a bonding experience and to have the child have a pleasant experience that they're going to remember. And then you're going to hopefully be able to carry out that schedule, but also build it around the child's pacing. So you're not going to cram in 5 different events in one day because 1 or 2 will be plenty and then decompress by the pool or in front of the TV for the rest of the day. And you're also going to build it around their special interests. So all children have special interests, not just children on the spectrum, but especially children on the spectrum have very specific interests, whether they're insects or dinosaurs or elevators or what have you. Trains are very popular. You're going to maybe build in some trips to special museums that deal with that interest so that there's something special for them. And that makes the more mundane parts of the vacation easier to deal with because they've got this great thing to either look forward to or to remember afterward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any trips when you have other kids, though, too?
Yeah, a good point. And a lot of people bring that up because plenty of people have maybe one child on the spectrum and one neurotypical child. And so places like large resorts that are autism certified, like beaches in Turks and Caicos and in Jamaica, have kids clubs that are specially trained to take care of both neurotypical and neurodiverse children. And also there's so much to do that there's a diversity of what you can do, but there's also an opportunity for you and your partner to spend some quiet time together without the kids. Same thing on cruises. All the major cruise lines have staff that are trained to work with people on the spectrum. And there is a core company called Autism on the Seas that will specifically design cruises either for you to go on your own or as a group. But the beauty of having a kids club that is specially trained is, again, gives you some time alone. And there's so much to do that the kid who's not on the spectrum has a lot of choices. But I also recommend sports vacations. So everybody likes, well, not everybody, but most people like one of these, whether it's going to be a dude ranch with horseback riding, or it will be golf, adaptive skiing, scuba diving. All those have a therapeutic component for a child because children on the spectrum really tend to avoid or prefer to avoid team sports where there's a lot of interaction between people. And of course, that's a generalization. There are probably some who do, but in general, they don't. And the beauty of something like golf is you're there to perfect your swing and your game, and you're not really interacting with others as a team. And there's something for everybody. I was personally surprised that scuba was so therapeutic, but the compression of the wetsuit is very helpful. And also the quiet underneath the water is very therapeutic.
Okay, interesting. What about people that can't afford that? Because everything we've mentioned, I'm like cruises,
Yeah.
Disneyland,
Camping. There's you can absolutely go camping, and I have a chapter on camping and how to vet a campground. Road trips, I have a chapter on how to travel in your car and how to lay out that itinerary. Vacation rentals tend to be cheaper with larger families than hotel stays where you're getting more than one room. And I also have a chapter on restaurant dining, which is an ongoing issue. At least it was for my family.
Yeah. I think all of these tips can help to every parent depending on like what their kid is not great at when they're on vacation. I mean, sometimes you don't really know till you get in this situation, unfortunately, right?
Well, staycations are also a great way to try that out. So before you spend a lot of money on a hotel for a week, spend a night at a very great relative or friend, very empathetic person who will let you sample what it's like to sleep in a home. The child gets to sleep away from home, a place that they're not familiar with. It's going to show you the triggers, so you'll be aware of them for when you do spend the money on a hotel.
Yeah.
Before you go on a cruise, maybe take a ferry ride. Before you take a long train ride, maybe take a commuter ride. There's ways to introduce these concepts to the child where it's inexpensive and, short.
Yeah.
And the beauty of cruises also is that they can be very short.
That's true. Yeah, there's a lot of 3-dayers out there where they're good test drive. And I think what's important for the moms out there is you might need your own vacation, because a lot of this sounds kind of like stressful and you're 100% catering to your kids rather than to your needs. And mom may need her own vacation after a vacation.
Or get a sitter on location that is trained for working with people on the spectrum, or if you have an anxious child, I have profiles of various companies that do that, or bring along a family member who might enjoy the vacation, but knows that they might be on call.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Any other last minute tips before we go?
Yeah, I'd really advise people to follow my blog at travelingdifferent.com, which updates the book, but also supplements it. So there's a lot of things that keep coming up. Like there's a chapter on how to deal with the post-vacation letdown.
Oh, yeah.
I just did a piece on adaptive surfing around the country, or actually around the world. So I'm updating the book constantly with new content on the blog, and it'll also tell you where to see me if you're really desperate to see me, where I'll be, and also just basic information about where to buy the book.
Okay. And what's your website?
Travelingdifferent.com, and it's traveling with one L. I'd also ask you, if you buy the book, great. Otherwise, please ask your local library to stock it, because then people who can't afford it will be able to read it.
Yeah. Thank goodness for libraries. All right. Thanks for coming on, Dawn. Sure appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I think it's really important to think about every kid's needs before you go on vacation. And I had no idea that there were so many ways for people on the spectrum to get help. But also, if your kid isn't diagnosed, but they also have an issue with inflexibility or anxiousness while you travel, I think getting her book would be a great idea, just so you can talk about those things in advance, because a lot of times talking about them and saying, I feel anxious on the plane too, can really help. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. The Pulling Curls podcast grows when you share us on social media or leave a review. If you do, please tag us so that we can share and send you a virtual hug, which frankly is my favorite kind of hugging. Until next time, we hope you have a tangle-free day.